Hello, my
We are
friend.
back.
We are back. We have the original international leftist panel. It's been a long time. Been a long time since we had the crew back together. Things change, but it's Thursday night. We have. Let me fix. Hold on. Audio back on. So Thursday night is where we're gonna try plan to do these more often. We used to hold these on Tuesday, so this will be the first time we're doing this on Thursday show. There's so much to cover. So much to cover. I do want to pass it to Peter because sorry, to Kareem because we got video that that we want to play. The the Biden administration has been on a terrorizing spree of the world, right? They got this new apartheid report. Anyway, I'll let the video speak for itself. But as always, whenever they come out with these reports that criticize Israel, you have the United States and Israel, of course, come out strongly against it. But I want to play the video and I want to get Kareem and the panel's thoughts on it.
International's Philip Luther. Amnesty video goes on to detail a history of the Israeli state, then document how Israel has implemented its apartheid system today.
One way to understand this segregation and oppression is to look at the ID system. Jewish Israelis have only one ID card, with a status that grants them the right to live almost anywhere they wish in the country. They can move freely with access to healthcare and vast resources. Palestinians, on the other hand, have 4 types of ID cards, if any at all. The kind of ID card you are given determines the level of rights you can enjoy and controls where you can go and what you can do. If you hold a green card, you are subject to military rule. And if you have a green card with a Gaza address, it means you're trapped in a 365-kilometre square open-air prison under Israeli military blockade in place since 2007. Israel controls what goes in and what goes out, from children's toys to medical supplies. 90% of the people have no access to safe drinking water, 47% are unemployed, 56% live in poverty. Palestinians with a Gaza ID are forbidden from going to Jerusalem in the West Bank, even if they have family there. Some people in the West Bank are considered to live there illegally and can be deported immediately to Gaza if found by the army, even if they have been in the West Bank for decades. Whereas, if you hold a green card which has a West Bank address, then you live here. This green card means you can live within specific enclaves surrounded by illegal Israeli settlements. And there's a separation wall and fences built around you since 2002, which Palestinians call the Apartheid Wall. It's 8 meters high in places and 700 kilometers long. That's twice the height of the Berlin Wall and more than 4 times its length. 80% of it is built inside the West Bank, occupying even more Palestinian land. There are separate roads for Israelis and Palestinians, hundreds of checkpoints scattered throughout, not to mention the 54 years of occupation, which has devastated the lives of millions of Palestinians. Palestinians with a West Bank ID can travel to Gaza or East Jerusalem, but only if they receive a permit from the military to do so. This blue ID is for Palestinians in East Jerusalem. They can travel to the occupied West Bank as well as to Israel, but they are not citizens of Israel. They have only been granted a residency status. This means that they cannot vote in Israeli national elections, and if they leave East Jerusalem for too long, for example, to study or work abroad or in other parts of the occupied West Bank, their residency is revoked, so they can't return. Since 1967, Israel has revoked the residency status of more than 14,600 Palestinians from East Jerusalem. If this complex ID system wasn't enough to segregate the Palestinian community, in 2002, Israel introduced a law that prohibits family unification. That's right, denying Palestinians the right to live with their loved ones if their ID cards are different. And this woman is one of thousands of Palestinians who Israel will not issue any ID card. She can't travel, can't hug her family, only see them meters away across the border. Putting down roots, the family home, these are crucial parts of what make a strong community. To make sure Palestinian communities can't develop any further, Israel has made it almost impossible to grant building permits for Palestinian homes. Still, Palestinians live in a catch-22 situation. In order to have shelter or develop their communities, they must build without a permit. And if they do so, Israel can demolish the structures on the basis that it was built without a permit. Right now, there are over 150,000 Palestinians currently living under the constant threat of demolition and forced eviction, many of them for the second or third time. In the West Bank, an average of 18 Palestinian structures were demolished every week in 2020. The same year, Israel issued 1,094 building permits for Jewish applicants and only one for Palestinian. This goes back to the heart of the issue. To maintain the state's character as Jewish, Israel systematically disadvantages Palestinians while privileging Jewish Israelis. This racist privilege has been enshrined in laws, policies, and practices, and it enables Palestinian resources to be taken in order to economically benefit Jewish Israeli citizens.
I think that was a good summary, right, Kareem? I think we all played 4 minutes of that, but that sums up the apartheid state really well. And I will pass it back to Kareem in the panel, but I want to highlight the fact that if you're an apartheid state, you cannot be a democracy. Apartheid states are not democracies. And what we have seen just throughout the course of the last few decades is the two-state solution just does not work. This will always be the result of the two-state solution. But anyway, I want to pass it back to Kareem because I appreciate you for flagging this. You have anything else you want to add to this video as well before we open to the panel?
Well, I just wanted to share this because it's very powerfully summarizes just the more how can you say that the kind of rules, the different kind of apartheid rules for different groups in Israel, and more importantly, you know, when you see this, I just wonder how long do we still have to see this? Like how far does it have to go for the world to finally say enough is enough? It's if when you see this and you let this really when you really internalize this, you realize there is just a group of people that are living like animals for no other reason than being born, being of a certain ethnicity. Okay, they're Palestinians. They have not done anything. You are born, and because you are born, you are imprisoned and treated like an animal, literally like an animal. See these poor people standing across the water. They cannot even hug each other. They cannot hug their mother, their father. And I just wanted to show this because I think that's the only thing we can do right now is repeatedly showing people what's going on. Keep the focus on the situation, because before you know, we have something terrible happening in another part of the world, and we completely ignore what's happening there again. Just like the whole Sheikh Jarrah thing, you know, where people are expelled from their houses. That was a big hype back in the day, and then other things happen around the world, and we stopped thinking about it. People stopped caring about it, and in the meantime, people are being thrown out of their houses. And I don't know. I just wanted to refocus on what's going on there, and I'm happy Amnesty International also says it's an apartheid regime, just like what we would saw in South Africa. Of course, qualitatively different, but the same idea. And I think it's something for us to really start to understand, that there are people who are born, have never done anything in their life, just normal, innocent people, and immediately, because you are born, you are treated like an animal. I think that's very important to understand how terrible that is.
Their children develop a lot of psychological illnesses and deformities because as children, they get used to hearing the sounds of bombs. And I remember hearing this interview of this Palestinian mother, and she described how almost freaky it was that her baby got used to it. Like she had like a 1-year-old child, and every time Israel would bomb Gaza, the baby would jump. The baby would jump. The baby would jump. Then eventually the baby got used to it. And then she used that as a metaphor to describe the lives of Palestinians. The people are living in conditions that no humans are supposed to be able to adapt in, but they have adapted under this apartheid state. And what you shown with the bulldozing is the incremental genocide and how they're able to justify it, because they do it, as they said, by week, slowly, block by block. They're smart that way. Instead of just immediately seizing Palestinian land, they do it slowly. house by house. And all of a sudden, Palestine lost a large chunk of its land. That's how they are. That's how they season the state of Palestine, right? Anyone have anything to? I want to open it up to panel to Peter, Drosana, and Asal.
I wanted to address that question. What can we do? Because today, when I woke up to the news of the children that were assassinated by the U.S. military, I keep on thinking that the only solution the only solution is if we together stop paying taxes. Because when I received that news, I was like, oh, I helped kill the children. I'm helping the killing of Palestinian people. I'm helping the sanction war against the countries that has sanctions on it. I'm supporting, I'm sponsoring that. So I truly believe that we need to be as radical as we can and as courageous as we can to have a large amount of people, a huge group, to start paying taxes.
There's an organization.
We are anti-war. Sorry, Peter, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add to that. There's an organization called, I think it's the War Tax Resistor League, something like that. If you look them up, it's a group that tries to get people to stop paying taxes, but do it in a particular way as a message to the empire to draw down. But yeah, that's a really good question. Like, what can you do? I mean, the number one thing we could do as U.S. citizens is to take political power in the U.S. because the Israeli right's number one concern, like foreign policy concern, national security concern, is losing the unconditional support of the U.S. government. That would be the only thing in the foreseeable future that could actually change Israeli government policy. So if you're in the U.S., people with U.S. citizenship organizing to capture state power is the number one thing you can do, and then number two would just be spreading this information, like this, the fact that more and more people, particularly in the U.S., around the world, I think probably the majority opinion previously was that the Israeli government perpetrates an apartheid regime, but within the U.S., there's a lot of worry now that more and more people are recognizing the Israeli government as an apartheid regime. So spreading that understanding to get people to, even if we don't actually capture state power as a left, because we don't really have a left. We have leftists, but we're not organized into any like serious party. But before that, we could at least spread understanding about the situation so that there's less kind of knee-jerk support for whatever the Israeli government does in the U.S.
I want to get us all in here as well. Do you have anything you want to add to this?
Well, I think one of the important things is we always talk about this idea of sort of like ignorance within and being propagandized as a nation. And so I think part of what we can do is partially what we're doing right now, but sort of pushing that point. And however we feel about our elected officials, I think they still have to be pushed. I don't think that saying nothing to them would constitute anything. I mean, you're seeing, I've been following sort of the issue of Palestine since I was a teenager. And when you look at it from the US perspective, the way that it's talked about now versus the way that it was talked about, 2 decades ago is not even comparable. 1 decade ago, 5 years ago, all of it has changed. So that is a reality of that is grassroots though. That's activists. That's people who are going out there and pushing these stories, no matter how much propaganda there is in the country, no matter how much sort of rhetoric the US officials try to use, even legal maneuvers that they try to use, right? Like the fact that you have so many states that try to pass anti-BDS laws as if we're not legally allowed anymore to decide how we spend money. It's one of the most bizarre things to be told in this country. You have to, there are cases of like teachers in Texas that have to sign papers that they have allegiance to Israel or they won't criticize Israel. These are insane things that have been attempted in this country to silence those voices. But that's because those voices are becoming louder and louder because it becomes impossible to ignore it. The parallels between, obviously, the situation of Palestine and South Africa are not mirrors of each other, but there are clear parallels within them. And when you look at the example of South Africa, it's not like that was a quick fix either. It took the United States was one of the last countries that, again, supported the apartheid regime in South Africa. It resisted changing anything. But it was through grassroots pressure, mobilization, pressure on governments, pressure on universities, pressure on companies, all of these different things to have targeted action that actually forced that didn't just force the South African government. How was the South African government forced? Because it forced this government to stop supporting apartheid in the same way. And so, yes, we have the power to change what this government does, despite the fact that from our present sort of perspective, it doesn't look that way. But remember, in the 1980s, Reagan resisted the idea of sanctioning South Africa, of doing anything that would impede the economic ties between the two countries. So I think that that's something important to keep in mind in terms of what we do. But the amount of hypocrisy that comes out of not just this administration, obviously every administration in the US, but it is mind-blowing that the Biden admin now has so at the very beginning of January 2021, this is before the Biden admin takes over, but it's within a week before they take over. That's when one of the leading human rights organizations in Israel, an Israeli human rights organization, B'Tselem, comes out and says outright, what is happening is apartheid, calls it apartheid. In last year, in 2021, now this is under the Biden administration, Human Rights Watch, whatever you think about Human Rights Watch, this administration cites it as a source about human rights. In Israel, they cite Human Rights Watch as a source about human rights when Human Rights Watch is criticizing states they don't like Iran, right? So Human Rights Watch is a great source. Amnesty International is a great source when they're criticizing Iran. But somehow, when they criticize Israel, when they come out with reports that took years of research, hundreds of pages of research, they reject it outright. So you have an administration that talks about centering human rights in its foreign policy. This is an actual post. You can Google it. You can go to the White House page. That was the point. This foreign policy, the new Biden foreign policy, is centering human rights. You have Blinken tweeting, "We will always stand up for human rights at home and abroad." And what is the U.S. reaction to the world's most recognized human rights organizations saying that this is apartheid? They're not accusing it of apartheid. They're not saying it's allegedly apartheid. They're not saying it might be apartheid. They're saying this is apartheid. How do you define something? How do you say something is what it is? It's the interpretation of the people who are actually experts in international law that tell you something is what it is. And they are telling us, and we're denying it. And so as long as we do that, as long as, and I've said this so many times, but it's shocking that we're this hypocritical, as long as we are just a parody of hypocrisy, nothing we say makes any sense. There is no way to reject these findings. And yet, that's what this admin is doing.
Yeah. So I wanted to, I shared an article with you, Nick, and that is from Desmond Tutu. And Desmond Tutu not only said that the apartheid regime in Israel is familiar to Black South Africans, but in fact, I saw an interview with him where they asked it. I think it was in the United States. I'm not sure. They asked it like, "Oh, you compared it with South Africa. Do you really think it's comparable?" And he said literally said, "No, I think it's worse. I think the treatment of Palestinians is worse than what we went through back in the day." And that says something when someone like Tutu says that, about the treatment of Palestinians. And I think there's another important thing, Nick, that you just mentioned and highlighted, which is so important, which we often forget. It's the same with other wars like Syria or Afghanistan. And you talked about that baby, that baby that started to get used to the sound of bombs. We often forget the individual level suffering. We see large scales. We see that map, that map of Palestine disappearing slowly. We hear about bombs, so many thousands of deaths. So we hear about the large scale suffering, okay? But it becomes almost intangible. But when you really start thinking about the individual level sufferings, for example, that baby but also think about all the people every day, the thousands of people who need to pass these checkpoints with these arrogant soldiers, that bully old people who cannot go to the hospital, that kick and humiliate men and boys, but also don't forget that sexually harass Palestinian girls. I've seen this documentary one time of this Palestinian girl that had to go to university. I think she was like 19 years old, and every day had to go through sexual harassment from these young men saying, hey, come, go on a date with me, or you cannot pass. And this was, she said, because the camera was there, this was still innocent. She said, you don't know what happens when the camera is not there. Okay, because these girls have no rights. Okay, and these are all young, aggressive men in the army with total power. I think we ought to forget these things, these individual sufferings every day of people who are treated like nothing. You know what I mean? Just wanted to bring that in.
Can I mention something?
Yeah, go ahead. So I'll go off.
Since Kareem brought up Palestinian children, I was saying earlier, like the way that the discussion, it's still the way that the issue of Palestine and Palestinian rights is discussed in the US, especially amongst officials, is still, I mean, horrible compared to what it actually is, right? We don't exist in reality. There's so few who are actually willing to say something. But again, it's sad that it's so much better than it used to be. But one representative, Betty McCollum, actually specifically introduces legislation to protect Palestinian children, because it is mind-blowing to me that we talk about human rights, we sanction human rights abuses in other countries, but then Israeli authorities, Israeli security forces, Israeli military detain children. When you see footage of, and this exists everywhere. It's very easy to find. When you see footage of Israeli soldiers going into a house in the middle of the night to wake up children, to take pictures of them, that is not an accident. That's intentional. You are intending to traumatize these children. That is abuse. So we are watching, and we're not just watching, I should take that back. We're not passively, it's different. If the US was just taking no action, that would be one thing, right? We're just passively watching this happen. Okay, we're not. We're actively supporting it. We're actively paying for it. Our tax dollars are going to torture children. And we're just sitting here defending it as if it is possible to defend the detention of children, the interrogation of children, and traumatizing children, essentially. So we're talking about these individual things, but there are very, very slight glimmers of hope where it is being addressed here. But those are the things that we have to make sure that we're supporting, to make sure that there's a voice that says, yes, this is the kind of legislation we want to see in this country, or else what becomes the alternative? And we've discussed what the alternatives to that would be.
This comment is crazy. The average age in Gaza went from 25 to 15. So that average age is already extremely low. But you see how it dropped some more. I assume that because of mass death. I would love to read more about that. That's a crazy comment. But I was just looking up some. I want to get Josana here. Yeah, go ahead, Josana. I want to get you in here.
I just wanted to add a point to what Asal just said. I think we are supporting the detention, torture, and sexual abuse of children because it also happens right in the American soil. Like, I have a person inside, I mean, they will be protected. I have a person inside the cages, the concentration camps in the border with Mexico. There is no supervision, and the children are abused every day and tortured every day. So I think this is more like CIA practice of war than anything else. And that's why when Peter says, like, take political power in the US, I keep on remembering this conversation that I had recently where I could never understand, why are Americans not camping in the streets? Everywhere else, we do that in Central and South America. We want you to do something. You are not listening to us. We are going to camp in front of your house. And we are going to stay there until we get what we need. So, and I never understood, and I think taking political power is just to get away from the numbness to being used of having a war going on and violence to being used of being a violent country. that inflicts pain all around the world for money, and doing and actively working to push it back. Like we can feel the climate and the economy is broken, and yet Biden is pushing for a war, because that's how this country make money. They broke in 1929, and they discovered if they sold guns for both sides of the war, they would make money. They would be potents. And guess why is Biden pushing for a new war?
Asal, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I just, I think part of what Josana is saying is so important, because it's like, well, why don't you see more of like protests in the country? Usually there has to be some kind of event that sparks it, right? Which we saw in the summer of 2020 with the murder of George Floyd. You finally actually saw some action amongst American people. You saw this with the anti-war movement in the early 2000s. But part of it is also because life has gotten much, much harder in the US. And that's the part we don't talk about, right? So, and this isn't just true of the US, it's true of other countries as well. For instance, when we talk about when opponents of, say, like diplomacy, people who are pro-sanctions on Iran, also talk about somehow being pro-democracy in Iran. Those of us who are pro-diplomacy and anti-war and anti-sanctions say, well, when you decimate a population, when they have, when they're worried about eating, when they're worried about just taking care of their family, having a habitat, having access to medicines, they're not in the streets protesting. That's not how the psychology of a human being is, right? You have this concept of like Maslow's hierarchy. It's just like you have to get your basic needs met. And we don't realize that there's so many people in this country who are struggling, and there is that intentional, again, like an intentional way of sort of numbing the masses and making them not be politically active, is because they don't have time, they don't have energy, they're working multiple jobs to make ends meet. I saw a video the other day that I think went viral. It was a woman who was probably in like the millennial age group, just crying, just constantly, just could not hold her emotions back, talking about how she's been working in this country for 17 years. She has multiple jobs. Her husband works, and they're just struggling. And their son has been diagnosed with diabetes, and they cannot afford his insulin medicine. And this woman is just crying, not knowing what to do, literally looking at the camera, looking out, she thinks, into the world, asking like, what is it that we're supposed to do? Like we work, we have jobs, where we're trying to support our family, and we can't afford medicine for our son. This is in the US. There are cases of younger, teenagers, people in their 20s dying because they don't have their insulin medicine. This is the richest country in the world, and people are dying because they can't get insulin. So it's not just a matter of, why aren't we focused on these things that our foreign policy is doing or our domestic policy? It's because people are struggling, and that's what they're focused on, is their own individual struggle. And it's really hard to sort of like judge that.
Now there's actually an opportunity that creates for us as well, because unlike the main advice people give when talking to politics to apolitical people, they say don't talk about foreign policy, but I actually do. So you're 100% right. Yeah, when people are working and struggling, they don't have time to see the evils of our society, and that's why capitalists want to work us to death, right? But there was also a theory that neocons had back in the day. They were like, all right, we want to make sure that we can somewhat take care of people at our home, so then if they like fat and take care of, they can be pacified, right? So I actually take advantage of the fact that they forgot that part of it. So I actually tell people, when I talk about anti-war stuff, I bring up how much we spend on the military and on the military budget, despite what everyone will tell you, right? People will say, hey, don't bring up like nerdy foreign politics to people. People don't care. I dispute that. I talk to people who are completely apolitical. I'm like, hey, we spend $860 billion per year on our military. And when I tell people that money could go to our community, they immediately be like, yeah, fuck that. Like, because people are not taken care of. So I think we got to take advantage of that and lead like head first into that. Because getting people against Barack Obama, especially black people, was very hard. It was very hard to turn people against Obama. But the number one thing I found success was, in terms of turning people against Obama, is talking about the people he bombed. Oddly enough, I would talk about the Flint, Michigan. I would talk about the Wall Street crash, oh, what can you do? What can you do? What can you do? But when I bring up the fact that he bombed Doctors Without Borders and he took 2 wars to 7, that is what I had the most. People were like, what? So he was like George Bush. So I think people underestimate how much you can win people over. It's just people too distracted to know what's really going on, and I think that's also a core issue. I also want to share something that I saw tweeted out because it also backs up her earlier point. And I also want to share some more details. And like the Amnesty International, like just as Saul was saying, them coming out and saying that Israel's apartheid state and them doubling down is giant. I think they're like the largest grassroots anti-war group, right? But anyway, like I saw tweeted here, and I'll give you a chance to explain some more if you want. But you said Israel is an apartheid state. The U.S. is giving it, I had to count the zeros here, $3.8 billion a year in military aid. So this is what you said earlier. The U.S. taxpayers are funding apartheid. And I frame it that way. You see how Saul frames it? That's how you frame it to people. I tell people, like, the 2.3 million deaths in Iraq is being funded by your taxpayer money that could pay for healthcare. Boom. All of a sudden, they asking questions. I don't know why people don't lean more into that. Do you guys have anything else you want to comment? I have another part I want to get to the story before I move on. I pass it to the panel.
I just wonder.
Then,
and by the way, your article on the Iran Orientalism, it was amazing. It's a masterpiece.
Oh yeah, let me find that. Let me find that.
And I just like I just wonder, like, there is nothing anymore. There is no pretending. There are no masks anymore. Like, we're not gonna give you health care because we're gonna bomb people with your money, and you're gonna sit there and cry. So when we talk about, like, people are working and struggling, I keep on thinking about people in Central and South America that are actively dying from starvation, but they are protesting because of that. They go with the courage because they know they have to push back. And that's why I always bring that up, because I'm like, your Southern relatives want to fight with you. Wake up. Let's go. Because if we're able to wake up and let's go, there is balance with the change. This change in the US is a change that will reverberate, hope that's a word, in the world. And I don't understand, because, like, poor countries, people are actually actively protesting and facing the consequences of it with courage, because all we know is misery. And we need to fight for that right to exist. Sorry, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, all of you have been making really good points here. And one thing I wanted to add is there's a lot of public opinion polls over the years asking average people in the US about foreign policy. And you have majorities, poll after poll after poll, that want things like the UN taking a leadership role in international affairs, not having the US act unilaterally. So when you ask normal people that are not well informed about foreign policy, a majority of them want a more peaceful, more diplomatic foreign policy that does not include war and sanctions and harming other people as its primary method to use. So then you mix that with people are brutalized, they're focused entirely on survival, but then they still don't protest. And the key part here is information in people's heads. That's what we lack in the US. Very few people know what the US foreign policy actually is. They have an idea that they want the US to, follow the UN and work with other countries, but they just don't know what's actually going on. So education is so important. And I touch on this point so much because there's a psychological bias that I think is at play here, especially with people. Well, the people I care about are the people on the left in this instance, but it's called the curse of knowledge. That basically what it says is our brains are really bad at understanding what other people don't know that we know. Once we learn something, we kind of assume that everyone knows this, but we have to stop doing that. The first assumption should be everyone is uninformed about everything that I've learned that makes me take these positions on foreign policy or domestic politics, whatever. So if we can get rid of that and recognize that our main enemy, really our main problem that we have to fix is ignorance. Ignorance is the key thing. So exactly what Nick was doing, like going and talking to people and educating them, you're going to find, I think, like Nick's experience, that people are much more open to these ideas than you might think. Because if you're assuming that they just support the US government because they know anything about US foreign policy and they accept that, that's only true for a very small minority. So keep that in mind and realize that there's a lot of room there for educating people.
Yeah, and also be prepared for a lot of anger, by the way, because I think a lot of people have been so indoctrinated with the idea they come from some kind of exceptional society that a lot of people find it very hard, very painful to hear. Like I said, I always think that our colonial past, our Western colonial past, I say Western in general, is so important to understand where we are today. Colonialism was the time that we created that unfettered capitalism, racist hierarchies, and so forth. And that's the way our Western systems still work. And I think one of the most crucial things for us to understand is that we understand our colonial past, to understand where we are today, internationally, with our system, our cultures. But, and I write a lot, I write academic papers, but I also write sometimes in newspapers of my own country, the Netherlands. What I do is often I highlight the colonial past of the Netherlands and connect that, for example, to the racist policies and the racist behaviors today. A lot of people become extremely angry and extremely hostile when you talk about, when you actually lay bare the truth about one society. You know what I mean? So be prepared for that. We have to also like take that into account, that we're going to get a lot of pushback, you know, because a lot of people just don't want to know. And there was another thing I would like to jump into what Asal just said. Asal said, like, we are the richest country in the world. In the Netherlands, we also have the tendency to always say we are the richest country in the EU and all that kind of stuff, or one of the richest countries. Actually, we're not the richest country, or you're not the richest country in the world. You're just the country with the richest people in the world. That's it. You guys are not rich at all. Your whole society is breaking down. You just have a bunch of oligarchs that are super rich. You know, I think that is something we really need to start understand.
And
then
that's, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, that was just,
go ahead, Kareem. Go ahead, bro.
okay. No, there was just one quick thing I just wanted to say, and to get back to that whole culture of colonialism. The fact that Israel is mistreating the Palestinians this way, or that South Africa could mistreat black people for so long, the fact that until today our Western governments en masse are still supporting Israel, shows the deep-rooted colonial mindset that is in our cultures. Palestinians are worth nothing, okay? And that colonial idea of oppression of people who are classified as the other, that is so deep-rooted, it destroys the empathy of many of the people, of our people, for those who are classified as the other. You know, I think it's so important for us to understand how deep-rooted that is in our cultures.
Yeah, check this out, because this is the massive putback we're gonna get. I'll pass it right to you, Josan. I want to show you guys this, because it's such a giant deal what Amnesty International is doing, because of what Kareem and Asal was laying out, because they are doubling down, even though you had the United States and Israel propaganda attacking them for speaking truth to power, because this is 100% true. They not only doubling down on this, but they are explaining the historical context that Kareem just mentioned. It's important to understand the historical root of the problem, right? So this is where they explain why they find Israel problematic. But look, this is what they always say, right? Israel says the Amnesty report is anti-Semitic. Their go-to, as if Palestinians are not Semitic people as well. But this is what they always say. Oh, if you say we can't have a two-tiered system, a failed two-state solution where we treat the Palestinians like minority, you're anti-Semitic, even though the Palestinians are Semitic people. It's crazy, unserious shit that it's almost clownish to the point where people are seeing through it. And they will try and use this anti-Semitic weapon to silence them. But I'm glad the Amnesty report, they didn't back down. And they cite, I won't pull this up because I want everyone to understand the historical context of the colonialism here, as Kareem pointed out as well. In the course of establishing Israel as a Jewish state in 1948, Israel expelled hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and destroyed hundreds of Palestinian villages in what amounted to ethnic cleansing, which they are still continuing today with the bulldozing of the homes. So now we have one of the largest grassroots organizations that are not only saying that this is an apartheid state, they're doubting the legitimacy. That's what they're saying in the report of the state of Israel because its foundations. This is giant, guys.
And not just that, Nick. Israel was founded with the help of colonial powers that dominated the Middle East. I mean, it's a pure colonial project. It's insane, you know. It's one of the last bastions of real hardcore colonialism. You know what I mean? That's just what I want to.
Watching people defend it is very insane too. But I want to get Josana in here. Then we go Saul one more time. Then I'm gonna switch subjects. So I got one more story that I want to cover quickly after that. So let's do Josana and then the Saul.
I just wanted to make a point to Karin's point that, like, I'm straight up from the third world. Hi. So when you have like a few oligarchs that are very, very rich and the rest of us are starving, because nowadays, in the present moment, if you don't have at least 2 jobs in the US, you're not going to survive. That's a third world economy for those that like to call it. That's a third world economy. Actually, I have been feeling like the US is just like the Brazil I grew up in. So I just want to say to the Americans, brace yourselves and rely on your Southern relatives. We know how it should live with cholera, for example. Y'all gonna have to learn.
So I want to share this. I want to share this link as well because this is very interesting. Because this is what happens when you debunk the narrative, right? I want to get your thoughts on this, Kareem. Emma Watson pro-Palestinian post sparks anti-Semitism. This is their method of attack, and it's so shameless to see it used over and over again. Whenever someone even put like a mild, tepid statement in support of Palestine. I don't know where tweet she sent it. I want to see what tweet. Hopefully she didn't delete it, right? This person said 10 points for being anti-Semitic. Well, let's see. So this is what she tweeted. Solidarity is a verb. What?
What? Yeah, well, it's pretty clear that now even posting the Palestinian flag is anti-Semitic. These people are we should actually just ignore their existence. They should not exist because if you think about them, you're an anti-Semite. And why is it so important to say this? Don't forget, anti-Semitism is a real thing. Okay, terrible, terrible thing happened to Jewish Europeans during the Second World War and before, by the way. And in fact, a lot of Jewish people were finding safe haven in Muslim countries in the Middle Eastern world, Iran, Arabic societies. But somehow the term anti-Semitism gets so bastardized that it's used to oppress and to ignore the existence of another group of human beings. Think about that. Think about the term, tying the term that became so important after the Second World War and the extermination of millions of Jews is being tied to the ethnic cleansing of another group of people. Think about that, how disgusting that is, how deeply morally disturbing that is, if you really, really think about that.
Yeah, that's so fucked up. So that's a great point someone in the comment made. And I've been calling out these right-wing culture warriors who they spend all their time talking about fucking Joe Rogan. But they dead silent about Black authors that are being censored because they write about their race. They don't even write about critical race theory. They write about their race and they get censored. The right-wing culture warriors, they're also silent about the issue of BDS. Where are the free speech warriors when it comes to our government crackdown of BDS and the BDS movement? Because if you're against BDS, how do you say activists and their allies should resist? They say, oh, you can't use violent methods, even though the human cost of this conflict is heavily one-sided. And when you look at the apartheid state of Israel, I just saw this scrolling by chance, right? The human cost of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That's not a war, guys. That's a fucking genocide. That's not a conflict. That's a slaughter. So even if you're one of the people that say, despite the fact that they're slaughtering your people, you can't defend yourself with violence. I strong. But if you disagree with me, the next thing you say, okay, no violence, economic boycott. The neoliberal establishment and the conservative right wingers don't even believe in their right to do that. Do you guys understand? That's the state that Palestinians are in. Let's see. I have
that's the point. That's the point that Assault made in the article. It's Orientalism. They're choosing the words. They choose the word conflict, so they don't write genocide. Right? A conflict inflicts that I am defending myself and I'm conflicting with somebody. So it's therefore not a genocide because I'm not being assassinated. I'm fighting. No, they're throwing rocks at bombs and guns. But sorry, go ahead, Assault.
Yeah, let's get Saul's last word here.
I mean, there's so many things I would want to say on this, specifically on the Emma Watson post, because I think I was actually one of the first ones who shared the post on Twitter. So she didn't tweet it. She shared it on her Instagram account, which is where she has more followers and where she's actually more active.
Here, post your tweet. I want to see what you said. What you say?
I just said all I did is take a screenshot of it and said she used her platform, which is a significant platform, to bring attention to like the solidarity with Palestinians, which I thought was something to applaud. Now, in her original post, well, one of the things that people commented on is so she's obviously like an outspoken political activist, especially in terms of women's rights, gender rights, but like she's very into using her platform for other activists. And so she allows, I think there was something in the profile that said like a feminist coalition or something are also posting on her account. So she is posting and other accounts are posting. She never reacted though to the fact that obviously she knew that it's not like the post was taken down. It's not like she reacted to it at all. She just allowed the post to sort of people to react the way that they did. All the post said, all it said is solidarity is a verb. It just happened to, it didn't say the word Palestine or Palestinian was not even used. But clearly the image is of Palestinian flags and you know, it's clearly referring to the issue of Palestine. It's just that it wasn't verbalized. And all it says is solidarity is a verb. That's it. For this, she got attacked as being anti-Semitic.
That's unhinged.
Now,
that's so crazy.
How can acknowledging the existence of one group of people somehow be against the existence of another group of people? Aren't people equal? This is the part that I don't understand. I'm like, aren't human beings, if you believe in human rights, are Palestinians not human beings at all? And that's precisely the problem. No, they're not. They're not. People who believe this do not consider them human beings. That is what dehumanization does. That's why we call it dehumanization. When you have constant images and rhetoric and discourse that makes it seem like one group of people is less than human, that's where you end up with somehow conflating the fact that simply saying that a group of people have a right to, not even have a right to exist, just do exist, is an affront to another group of people. Of course it's not. They're just human beings. They exist in the same space. It is not insulting to say that Palestinians are human beings. It's the most basic thing that you can do. And yet that has become equated with being anti-Semitic. And it doesn't make any sense. And I think Kareem brought up such an important point. Anti-Semitism is real. It's not like the way that it's being abused and weaponized by Israeli officials and American officials and supporters of an apartheid state. The way that it's being weaponized actually hurts the Jewish community, which is why there's a distinction between being Zionist and being Jewish. There's a distinction between being Jewish and being Israeli. There's that among the U.S. Jewish community, you had support for Emma Watson, and you have people who are criticizing constantly the actions of the state of Israel because it is a nation state. It is not representative actually of the Jewish population because it claims to be so, no more so than the Iranian government is representative of 1.5 billion Muslims because they call themselves an Islamic Republic. That is not how it works. And so just like we can be critical of those states, just like we can be critical of the state of Iran, despite its pretending that it's representative of anything, you can be just as critical of the state of Israel. It's absurd that you cannot be critical of a nation state because it has been intentionally, by design, conflated with Judaism and been conflated with anti-Semitism. And so many Jewish Americans I saw reacting to this. The reason why they were so angry is because they are the victims of anti-Semitism. They fear the fact that this is being trivialized. And now there's, the fact that it's being used in this way makes it meaningless when it is meaningful. And that is, to me, the worst part, that you are undermining something that is real by conflating it with something that is not. The existence of Palestinians is not anti-Semitic. Saying that Palestinians exist is not anti-Semitic. And you cannot just go around saying, oh, Amnesty International is anti-Semitic, Human Rights Watch is anti-Semitic. B'Tselem, which is an Israeli human rights organization, is anti-Semitic. Desmond Tutu is anti-Semitic. When he dies,
Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky.
Noam Chomsky is anti-Semitic.
No, he's a self-hating Jew. That's a slightly different thing.
Finkelstein. Norman Finkelstein.
Another
Self-hating
self-hating. Yes.
I remember they try to say Bernie was too. But go ahead, Saul.
I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But to especially the tweet that you put, which was Danny, who I can't remember his last name right now, but he was an ambassador to Israel. This is an Israeli official mocking Emma Watson by using a reference to Harry Potter. I mean, how much worse can you trivialize something like anti-Semitism than making some mocking joke about Harry Potter? It's so absurd. It's hard to even wrap your mind around. But that this is words from an Israeli official.
These people are scary. Go ahead, Kareem.
Well, I think I wanted to talk about something that Josanna shared with me a day ago from some person on Twitter. He or she, I don't remember. I think it's a he, made such a good point. Oh, she, my apology, made such a good point that we also should not forget white supremacy playing a role here in the whole oppression of Palestinians. And because this person made such a good point, and I remember Asal also making that point back in the day. I wonder if it was black Jews, for example, okay, Jews of color. If Jews of color would do the same thing, oppressing another group of people, how accepting the U.S. would have been, or the West in general would have been of this kind of behavior. You know, that's real food for thought. You know, if these were black Jews oppressing another group, would the West be just as supportive, or is it because these are European, mainly Ashkenazi Jews that with European white heritage that do the oppressing? You know, like, it's a painful question to think about, but yeah, food for thought.
So I have I think this last story I'm gonna do sums up a lot of what we talk about here. I think this could be a quick story, and then we're gonna wrap up on around an hour here. Because I mentioned earlier before, the Biden administration has been on the road. We cover Israel, Palestine, and I want you to acknowledge that your taxpayer money funds apartheid, and I also want you to acknowledge that your taxpayer money also funds the unapologetic bombing of children. So the United States is responsible for this attack in Syria. Now we got kids and children are dead. So let me show you my screen and show you how psychotic our system is. And you guys see it as I share it. Watch this. So this is the recent war crime of the Biden administration. The U.S. Special Forces landed in helicopters and assaulted a house in a rebel-held corner in Syria, clashing for 2 hours with gunmen. Witnesses says. Residents describe continuous gunfire and explosions that jolted the town. So they have an open warfare in this town of Ahmed. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but near the Turkish border. First responders reported that 13 people have been killed, including 6 children and 4 women. 6 children and 4 women. So what is the response of the West? And you want to see how they devalue these people's lives? You want to see the psychotic mindset of U.S. imperialism? You have the Biden administration, you had the Pentagon, and you had the military marking this as an amazing success because they apparently got rid of an ISIS leader. And they say, oh my God, this ISIS leader blew himself up, and that's why it led to these people dying. No sources confirming this comes from the Pentagon. They're trying to deny all responsibility behind this. But overall, they're saying the operation marked a military success for the United States. Despite the fact that we killed 6 children, 3 women. In my opinion, it don't matter who you kill. If they're a civilian, their life matters. But we gotta use propaganda to tug at people's heartstring. When you say it's a woman and children, people care a little bit more, right? But
which is sexism as well, by the way.
Yeah,
if male lives don't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're anti-imperialist, anti-war, that part shouldn't matter. I get we market it so we want to win over general people. So you gotta say women and children. But hey, it don't matter who you kill. That's my position, right? So Biden said in a statement he ordered the raid to protect the American people and our allies. Do you feel safe with us spending all this money on war and weapons that are just killing women and children? And they said, oh, we took out this ISIS leader. For one, do not ever accept what comes from the Pentagon until investigations are taking place. And literally for months later, because oftentimes during these attacks, they'll say, oh, we took out this ISIS leader, we took all these people. And then later they'll confirm, oh, no, it was all civilians. So I'm waiting to either see if that's true. Even if it is true, you never use the death of children and women to justify, you don't use that to justify your actions. So even if you kill this ISIS leader, okay, let me propose a scenario to you, right? If you assassinate a police captain, do you get rid of the police captain? Are you done with having police captains in your town? No. They hire a new police captain. There's going to be a new police captain. The same for any position of authority. If you assassinate a U.S. general, that is not the end of U.S. generals. They will get a new U.S. general. So now you guys, oh, we're going to fight terrorism by killing civilians. So what do you think happens that creates terrorists? Do people seek for revenge? You think they just ignore, oh, well, I guess you killed terrorists, so it don't matter that you killed my daughter. This is why U.S. counterterrorism does not work. But you see the mindset. I forgot to let me finish this last share here. All right, bro, have a good one. But not even just the Biden administration that's praising. We see how this AP just repeating this is a military success, because as we explained throughout the show, we do not value the lives of non-white people. And imagine if there was some sort of terrorist group that was going after a target, killed a ton of civilians, but they killed their target. We're like, victory, mission successful. Imagine how we would view them. And I'm trying to do a quick story because we run out of time, but I want to present one more thing, and I want to get your guys' thoughts, right? Because we talk about the psychology of imperialism. When you see the fact that we had kids and women get killed by U.S. bombs and U.S. taxpayer operations and raids, right? How do you justify that? How do we justify that? We talk about all the time on the show how we devalue the lives of non-Americans, the brown people, the others. So I must share you the main character of the day on Twitter, because he shows you the psychology of how they get away with war crimes. So this whole thing is going on in Syria, and everyone's reacting to the latest war crime that the Biden administration accomplished. This is not insane. Well, he is a right winger. But this is not MAGA. That's my point. This is a Democratic voter, some sort of fucking organization. And the reason I'm sharing this, where is it? The reason why I'm sharing with you, because this is a case study. We talking academics. You do academia. You do case studies, right? When we say the psychology of imperialism and racism leads to people to justify war crimes, what do we mean? We mean this. I don't know what this group is.
Who's saying this? This stuff is.
Yeah, I'm gonna read it out loud. Chris, hold your thought. I want to get your reaction. I really do. I can't wait for your reaction. I've been waiting to show you this all day. All day. I've been waiting to show Kareem this, because Kareem literally writes papers about this shit, right? So this has come from this person, right? In reaction of us killing kids, he said it's sad when kids are killed, but the hard truth about these kids, they're not the type of kids who come home after school and play soccer with their kids. They're not the good kids. They're the type of kids that start killing during their childhood. Their fate was sealed anyway. Nothing can save them. I got so much to say about that. I'm gonna pass it to the panel. But only thing I'm gonna say before I go off, this person is a terrorist. This person is a terrorist. Imagine if a Muslim had this ideology, the way the West will react. All the kids, oh yeah, we killed some American kids, but they're the bad kids. They're not blessed by Allah. Like, just imagine the other saying this. Sorry, I want to get your guys' reaction. Holy shit. You see that? That's exactly what we talk about. That's how they use racism to justify the brown kids being blown away. The bad kids are bad. The brown kids are bad. They're irredeemable. I want to get, what are you guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that this is the type of racial essentialism that we are so familiar with in our world. Who says this? Like who is this person? I
some
find it
sort
almost unbelievable that somebody
yeah,
says this.
this is some sort of ocean organization, like conservation organization. And based on I was doing some op-ed, like who the fuck is this? And people posting like old tweets of his. Apparently they're like a liberal Democrat. I'm trying to see if I can find one. They're like a standard liberal Democrat. So here it is. I want to show you who this organization is. They're Democrats. So this is what they said in 2017. Another Trump failure. This is one of the saddest yet. We just killed hundreds of civilians in Iraq. So he cared about dead civilians under Donald Trump. But then when Joe Biden became president, you see, this is the first tweet. I'm proud of Biden of ordering the raid in Syria. You guys see how the two-party duopoly rots your mind and your moral beliefs? He criticized Trump for killing civilians, but Biden did the same thing, so he had to praise and justify it, which leads him to saying, "Oh, killing the kid is not a bad thing." Man, I'm gonna go off, man. I want to give you guys.
Man, it sounds almost too banal, too weird for it to be real. But then on the other hand, we often, like Peter just said, that is the, how do you say it, the curse of knowledge. You think that when you think a certain way, that most people are think like you, or are as knowledgeable about certain things as yourself. But you have people who apparently think like that, and I mean, even if we are objectively looking at the numbers, children from which world would be the most, how can you say that, the most damaging to the rest of the world? I think the U.S. empire has killed more people around the world than any empire before. You know what I mean? So even logically, you would think that children from the U.S. empire would actually be more dangerous, but that would be as ridiculously essentialist as well. So what I'm trying to say here is that this people who think like this is so beyond me. It's like, it's so essentialist. This is pure demonization of human beings for being born as who they are. So you are born, like we see the same in the Netherlands, where you have people who say that we have mainstream politicians saying that children from the Middle East are testosterone bombs. Okay, so they are more physically and sexually aggressive. Okay, this is a kind of essentialism and dehumanization of a group of people that is deep rooted in our cultures. Okay, if you read old texts from colonial times, the way they spoke about black people or people from the Middle East or whatever, or the so-called savages, of the native populations in the Americas. That's so deep rooted in our cultures to think like that about other human beings. And it's a form of projection. It's a form of projection because we must admit, it's painful to say, but we must admit, what's the most violent group of people in recent history? It's Europeans. Like, there's objectively no denying. The most genocidal group of people in the recent history has been the Europeans in every continent of the world. Whether it's killing millions of Indians in Asia, whether it's killing millions of Africans in any country in Africa, let's say the Congo or Algeria, whether it's killing millions of Native Americans in North America, it doesn't matter. The most violent group of people were the Europeans. Is that ethnic? No, it's not ethnic. If you're born as a European child, you're not more violent. I would not think as crazy as that. What is it, though? It's our culture, our capitalist, white supremacist, colonial culture of domination and grabbing what you can grab. Not only countries, it's also grabbing what you can grab with regards to money. It's so deeply nested in our cultures, that violence, that super violence. And it's not a surprise that the combination of Europeans going to the Americas, in particular your guys, the United States, created one of the most violent cultures in the world. First of all, eradicating almost all animals and human beings that were there, and now eradicating human beings in the rest of the world. You know what I mean? It's very confronting, and it's just enraging, like Nick says. I get it, Nick. It's enraging when you see people from that part of the world saying about other innocent people, "You guys are violent. You're killers when you are born." It's sick. It's seriously.
Yeah.
It's sorry, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, amen, first of all. And then second of all, like that account, I think it's just some random guy that either works at the NOAA or like created an account that has the NOAA in it, but it isn't the official one. But that's kind of irrelevant. What
Yeah, they
the
ruined them though. Cause people, I saw the outrage. Whoever this is, they need to be fired, identified, because people are so upset. But sorry, Peter, finish your thought.
But that kind of thinking you see all over the place. Like you see exactly that kind of thinking from right-wing Israelis who say like, oh, yeah, some Palestinian kids were killed, but these aren't regular kids. These are kids that are going to strap a bomb on their chest. So we can be okay with them dying. Where else do you hear that? You also heard that in the U.S. Remember the whole like super predator thing? Like, oh, these kids, they're not really kids. They're super killers or something. So all of these examples are from a psychological perspective, it's like what's going on is cognitive dissonance. Like you want to believe that you and your in-group, your team are good, but then you're presented with information that makes your team, your in-group look bad. Like, oh, our army just killed a bunch of kids. That is very deeply uncomfortable. So instead of revising our beliefs, which is harder to do, it involves so much more work. Instead of doing that, we reinterpret that negative news in a way that makes us feel better. So now it's not that my government's army killed a bunch of kids. No. They killed these people that were of child age, but they were killers. So it's okay if they die. It's just a way of reinterpreting information that's coming in so that you can avoid negative feelings, basically.
I want to get Asal and Josan. Do you guys have any reaction to the Syria bombings, the psychology of this person? One thing I want to say before I pass to you guys, because like this kind of response to Kareem, but also a point I want to bring up as well. A lot of people debating whether this is a troll or not. People look into their posts. They think it's a real person. There are a lot of questions, but to me, that's not really that relevant. I'll bring this tweet up. I won't talk about these things for no reason. Do you guys know how they justify bombing kids? You guys want to know how they can just shoo away the fact that Obama bomb hospitals and bomb kids in the Middle East? Despite the fact that this moron said the quiet part out loud, and there are a lot of people who are pretending to be outraged, or maybe they are really outraged because they're not used to the truth being spoken this plainly. But don't get it twisted. This mindset is the dominant worldview of the neoliberal consensus in the Democratic and Republican Party. They are just smart enough to never say the dumb part out loud. So when they look at the numbers and they see 90% of drone strike victims are innocent people, it is rooted in this ideology. They are unredeemable. We are doing the region a favor overall because even though they died, they would have been worse off for us anyway. That's how they justify the 2.3 million dead in Iraq, right? But anyway, I want to get Asal and Josan in here. What's your guys' thoughts?
I'm going to be really honest and say that reading that tweet was a bit triggering because God, wow. You're right in the sense that it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter if it's a troll. These words were typed out and they were written and they exist because this mentality exists. This belief exists. And it's so interesting to say that the fate of these children were sealed without even beginning to understand that it was sealed in part by this country. It was sealed because we don't care about the amount of violence that we impose everywhere in the world. You pulled up the thing about Biden saying the strikes protects American people. What Syrian is attacking the United States? What protecting American people? It's America that's on the other side of the world. There are no bases. There are no Syrian bases. There are no Iranian bases. There are no Iraqi bases. There are no Lebanese bases. None of them exist around this country. None of their ships are by our waters. That is not what's happening. Stop calling it a defense. It's not a defense. We are our Coast Guard. And every time people defend this, it's like, well, that's not what the Coast Guard means. Then don't call it a fucking Coast Guard. Stop saying it's a Coast Guard if it's in the Persian Gulf. It's on the other side of the planet, and you're calling it the Coast Guard. Because the mentality is so broken that you can believe that we can do anything we want, that we can help seal those fates, but we have no part in it. You want to talk about ISIS? So American people are being protected from ISIS? Where did ISIS come from? ISIS came as in the wake of an illegal US invasion of Iraq. The existence of ISIS, the rise of ISIS, all of it emerged because of the exact consequences that people who warned against that invasion, against those wars, said that it would happen. Said that this is what you would do. You would just create more and more and more terrorism, because all you're doing is forcing people into destitution, into war for their entire life. If you are in Afghanistan, almost every single individual, millions upon millions of people in Afghanistan, have known nothing but war their entire life. Even if they're 50 years old, that's all they've ever known. And you know what? The US had a part in all of it. We trained jihadists in the 1980s in Afghanistan. The United States did that. We trained jihadists, and now guess who we go after? We do this over and over again. In the 1980s, guess who we supported in the Iran-Iraq war? Saddam Hussein. We didn't just know that he was carrying out chemical weapons attacks against Iranians. We actually helped give him the intelligence to do so. And then, with no irony, used those exact attacks as a point to show what a disgusting human being he was and why that allowed us to invade Iraq. Just circle after circle after circle of constant violence. And none of that is ever considered within a context where you have the nerve to say Americans are being protected. From who? Americans are being protected, and those kids' fates are sealed. Yeah, they're sealed. They're sealed in misery, in war, in destitution, in poverty. And I'm not blaming only the United States. There's tons of leadership in that region that sucks. But guess what? Every time there tries to be leadership in the region that doesn't suck, guess who carries out coups and wars and takes them out again? So you cannot just sit here and basically be the destroyer of the world in so many ways and then write something like that. It's disgusting to a point that it just doesn't matter who said it, why they said it. It exists, it's there, and it exists because people think this way. And that is what happens when you don't treat people like they're people. That's what happens when saying Palestinians exist equals anti-Semitism. That is what happens when you pretend that someone's existence is an affront to yours. It isn't. It isn't. We do not, if we actually did any of the stuff that we said, God, the world would be so much better off. But we don't do any of it. We do the exact opposite. And then we have the nerve to say, we're protecting American people. If you want to protect American people, give them health care. How's that? Instead of killing a bunch of people across the world, do things that actually help American people. But we can't pass bills that give basic needs, basic safety nets to the American populace. We have 40 million Americans who live in poverty. We can't do that because when you use the word trillions of dollars, that's too expensive. But we'll pay 10 times that amount to just kill people nonstop around the world constantly and then lie and call it defense. And I just want to add one more thing.
No, go on, Queen. Go on, Queen.
My rant. On the subject of Syria and Russia today, in the White House and State Department briefings, the State Department and the White House were pushed by journalists, shockingly, but thank God they were there. They were actually pushing them to say, well, what's the evidence of what you're saying? What is the evidence that Russia is going to have a false flag to invade Ukraine? What's the evidence of what you're talking about in Syria? And you know what this White House sounded like? A lot like the Trump White House, because basically they mocked the journalists and said, and there's a Washington Post journalist who wrote an entire thread on this, Felicia Sonmez, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but basically explained, so their response was, well, if you want to trust ISIS and the Kremlin over us, if you want to question US credibility, this is what was said by the State Department, if you want to question US credibility. So I decided to point out why people might question US credibility, because we lied about the war, WMDs in Iraq, because we lied about Afghanistan over and over again, because we lie and cover up civilian deaths in Syria, and because the people who actually show those lies, who release those lies, they're in prison. They're called whistleblowers. So yeah, I think it's fair to question the credibility of the US government.
Damn, I miss doing this show. I miss doing this show in particular. Great to have us all back. That was a mic drop. It's almost hard to follow that. Because that's the perfect summary. And that's why I think it's important to bring this up, because we talk about the psychology of imperialism, how they used and how they use racism and the devaluation of human lives to sell war. That tweet That's probably the best way to sum up all our shows. It's crazy. It's hard to read, and they're getting dragged by everyone. Like if you look at the tweet, it's probably one of the craziest ratios I've seen this year, at least. Because when people see it typed out like that, they are immediately repost. Like I'm seeing people from liberals, I've seen people from all over the political spectrum dunking on this person on Twitter. I'm not gonna show all of it, obviously, for you guys. But my question is like, bro, this is the dominant worldview of the neocons. This is how they justify the wars. So even though he's saying out loud, do not get twisted. Colin Powell believes this. I wish I had a video on. I might search it while you guys talk. But Madeleine Albright was asked about whether the deaths of innocent kids and civilians in the Middle East was worth it, and she said yes. She said
half
yes.
a million, right? Something half a million kids. What was
I
it?
gotta find that. I gotta find it. But go ahead, guys.
Million,
you guys talk, I might find it.
Yeah, the question was whether, because I think it was about the sanctions, actually. I think it was specifically a sanctions question on Iraq. This is when we starved Iraqis before invading their country. So the question was about sanctions, and because there were estimates at the time, this is in like the late 90s, I think, there were estimates at the time that said something like 300,000 or 400,000, 500,000 children have been, specifically the question was about children, had been killed because of U.S. sanctions, and was it worth it? And her response was,
I found a video.
Yes.
It's a quick video, but
yeah.
If you guys think I'm exaggerating when I say this is the dominant worldview, check this out if you haven't seen it. This is the person that Anna Kasparian interviewed, the feminist queen, Madeleine Albright. Isn't she the first female Secretary of State or something like that? And then like the first female Secretary of State, hold on, let me mute my mic. Was a war criminal? I'm gonna read that part. I know it can be hard, but what it said right here, it said, "Is the price worth it?" An interview with Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State during the Clinton administration. So she was the first female Secretary of State. I was right. She is responding to a question about devastating effects of sanctions imposed on Iraq after the Persian Gulf. According to the UN, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children died. So keep that in mind. Hundreds of thousands of children died. And she was asked, "Is the price worth it?"
Human rights, Nick. Nick, human rights.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it? I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Human rights. Human rights.
So just know that tweet.
But see,
that's what they believe. But Josana, go ahead.
But see, they appropriating of the word price, and I agree with her. The price was worthy for the U.S. imperialism. How much are they getting out of it? So when she's saying price, she's not saying price the same way that the person asked her. She's saying, yeah, it's worthy. The money is right here in my pocket. And it's a lot of it. So we don't see children life. And to the point that was made in that tweet, I will resource to my childhood so I don't curse all that I want to curse at that person right now. But that's exactly how we children of color grew up. School theater, never play the princess, always the villain. School ball, was never invited, was left aside. Grew up with no self-esteem because Nick represents what is the worst in the world. Asal also, even though she is Iranian American, represent what is the worst in the world. And to have a person think that it's okay to kill children because they were propagandized to think that we are villains, it makes me lose my strength to fight against the system. Because if the killing of children does not move your heart doesn't hurt you, check yourself out, my guy. You are one of the many psychopaths that are in this country saying it's okay, we're doing great. We are not. We are not. It's not the killing of the children that's going to make us feel better. The killing of the children, the price is worthy for the oligarchs that Karim brought up earlier. The price is not worthy for a common citizen, lower class citizen. Because if you're not an oligarch, you are a lower class citizen. Doesn't matter your race.
Yeah, and that's that's why the system, our culture of demonization is so important. Eh? I mean, if you watch enough Hollywood movies and enough Western CNN or MSNBC and Western TV show Fox News, you will lose empathy for other human beings. You will start seeing Arabs as terrorists or people from Iran. Doesn't matter. You will see black people as drug dealers and criminals. I mean, seriously, people are not immune to that stuff. If you have a systematic indoctrination system in place when you put on a television or you watch movies, this is what happens. People become numb to the suffering of people who are classified as the other. You know, pure psychology.
With that
And
said,
that's
I think-
exactly what,
go ahead.
that's
Peter.
exactly what Asal was writing about in that article
Yeah.
about the reign of Iranians. Like it's the exact same process, and it makes people feel better when they see an atrocity or something evil that like their side did. It makes them feel a lot better to dehumanize the victim in that instance, because then you don't have to revise your opinion or your beliefs about your in-group. You can continue to believe that your in-group is the good guys because the people you just found out that they killed, even if they're kids, well, if you can reimagine those people as bad guys, well, then now I don't feel bad. I don't feel icky.
So yeah, this is the perfect time because if you guys don't follow us on Twitter, you guys are missing out. She's also a great writer, as you guys see here, and she talked about how othering Iran's lead to bad policy. Now we've all get to a point where we wrap up. But I really want you guys to check out the writing of not only Asal but Kareem and Peter as well. I think I learned a lot from them. So I want to pass it to Asal. Explain like your overall thesis, what the message you want to get across when you was writing this, because this is kind of what we talk about a lot. But so I'm glad that you put a lot of this down on paper, and I'm gonna put a link. I got to edit into the description, but this is a great article. Yeah, anything you want to add to this to explain it a little bit more?
So the article is actually a sort of very brief summary of a report that I wrote, and the link for the report is in the article because I wanted to be able to really spell out that narrative. When we say what does dehumanization mean, you know, in like 800 words, it's hard to support and explain it. And so that's why there's a report that goes along with it, which actually takes you through a sort of history of mutual grievances between the US and Iran. It's specific to Iran, the report itself, but this issue is not specific to Iran, right? The dehumanization of Iranians cannot be really separated from Islamophobia or, you know, Orientalism, the dehumanization basically of non-white people across the world. The reason why I focused on Iran is because Iran has a sort of unique position in US political discourse. It's really like if Israel is the central friend, Iran is the central villain, and those two stories always kind of go together. And there's a specific history that points to why that is. And obviously we have a very adversarial relationship with the nation state. But for me, I mean, growing up, I was born in the US. Growing up as somebody who was of Iranian heritage in the United States, it was very sort of noticeable. These films, television, board games, like anywhere I would look, I experienced this over and over again. And it's not odd to me that the culmination of that process of dehumanization, something that's happened for decades, not only does it lead to bad policy, but it leads to, you know, you have US politicians who say things that are just absurdly racist, and they just say it. And if it's about Iranians, they don't really get that much backlash. Like, they just don't get that much backlash. You had Lindsey Graham, who's a senator, saying it would be terrible if his DNA test showed that he had Iranian heritage. I mean, that is That is an insult to their literal DNA. You have
Crazy.
Wendy Sherman, who was I think Undersecretary of the State Department at the time of the 2013 Iran negotiations, saying that deception is in their DNA. Again, they're not even subtle comments.
It's not
right?
even subtle.
This is as racist as you can get to say, hey, built into their DNA are these terrible things. Last year in the January 6th riots in the Capitol building, mind you, we all knew that Trump was having a rally that day. We knew that he was encouraging people to go to the Capitol, and somehow Senator Susan Collins thought that it was the Iranians at first. So it's like these are things that just get repeatedly said over and over again. So why does that happen? Because they've been almost cartoonishly vilified. And that's really what the report looks at, the impact it has on Americans of Iranian heritage. The fact that if I go to Venmo and I, go to a Persian restaurant with one of my friends and I just write Persian food, my account, the transaction gets frozen because I can't use the word for my ethnic food. Iranian Americans in 2020, after the assassination of Soleimani, were detained at the border and questioned about their politics, which makes no sense. These things, their bank accounts get closed for no reason because of sanctions, because there's so much overcompliance with sanctions that it affects the community here. And all of that, none of that is even remotely comparable to the amount of devastation that is actually imposed on Iranians in Iran, which is starvation sanctions, right? So all of that really is what I try to explain in the report by looking at this type of discourse in popular culture, in U.S. media, in political discourse, and then the specific consequences it has on our foreign policy, our immigration policy, and the civil rights of one particular group in the United States, which is Iranian Americans.
I'll read this. I'll read this one passage, and I want to I want to get A1 to plug whatever they working on. I will get Cream and everyone and Peter to chime in as well. But this paragraph, I think this is a good one to kind of sum up how they are able to pull this off. Such zealous anti-Iran attitude color U.S. policy decisions and influence American views towards war. It should be no surprise that research shows a positive correlation between racial resentment and support for military action against Iran. You especially seen this during the super right-wing fight against the Iran deal, right? That Trump was trying to make the Iran deal the culture war, even though anyone we all knew that Biden wasn't gonna do it, but right. But that's how this fervor they kick up is how they justify, as Asal point out, military action. And then as you explain, you do a really great job explaining throughout the course of this piece. So make sure you gotta check that out. I want to get Kareem and Peter in here for any last thoughts. Any last things on any of the topic we covered. Any upcoming projects for you guys? Let's start with Peter and now go Kareem.
Unmute. Yeah, I mean, I thought this was a great conversation. All of you guys are making really important points. I just thinking, going back to somebody asked, how do you educate people? And I think Kareem and I could talk about the psychological experiments that have been done that kind of touch on this, like how do you persuade? But I think actually it might be more interesting to talk with Nick about his experiences on the ground, because I think what would happen is we could find what one dynamic that was going on there was this, that, and the other thing. And maybe we could mix the kind of experimental result insights with the practical on the ground insights, because we don't have a blueprint for how to educate people, particularly when they have a belief that is incorrect or morally deficient and you're trying to change that. But there are little insights that I think once you absorb them, you can try to find practical moments in practical conversations where when you can use them to good effect. But yeah, I just think at some point in the future we should discuss that, because getting educated people is key.
I'm down. So a lot of you guys who used to follow this program know we was on Tuesday. But as far as I know, I think this is a pretty solid time slot for us. We all busy. We got professors here and everything. So we trying our best. But I think Thursday is a good slot. So make sure you guys tune in every Thursday for more conversation. I'm glad that you guys are enjoying it. But let's get Kareem in here. We'll see, no rush, but any last thoughts? I think it's a good time to wrap up to respect you guys' time. But no rush. Any last thoughts you want to have on the topic? Anything you want to plug or promote? Any thoughts on Saul Peach? Anything we covered today? Last word for you, Kareem.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that I'm glad that we, after this hiatus of our show, we're glad that we're back with our old school panel. I missed you guys, and especially us all together. I just love the conversations we always have, the charisma between us. It's wonderful. And also, what I also like is that we have increasingly a international audience for the show. I'm very happy about that. People from Germany, Palestine, Hong Kong, Japan, Latin America, Africa, everywhere, which is really good because we need an international connection among each other. So I think that's also really, really
It
cool.
shows their hunger in it. It shows that people want to see an international coalition, right? But go ahead, Kareem. I just want to add that.
Yeah, and I think this is our only way out. We are in a minority within our countries, but we can become big when we join hands across countries. Okay, I think that is very important to understand. And what Peter and Asal just said as well, I think that psychological effect, that social psychological effect that Peter and I often focus on in our academic work, and what Asal just wrote in her article. We've already done a show on that, on that Orientalism. Remember, that was a really good show. For those of you who want to find it, search on Revolutionary Blackout Network, and it was called European Racism and Orientalism. Really good show. Check it out. And I think that's an important aspect for us to get back to in the future, indeed, is that everyone who is like the connection between imperialism, okay, the treatment of Chinese, Iranians, Palestinians, Iraqis, Syrians, it doesn't matter, black people in the Americas, it doesn't matter. It's it's most of the time related to geopolitical developments. And so racism is a really, really good tool to every time find support for geopolitical developments. For example, right now, we see that support for Palestine and Palestinian people is growing, right? We're quite happy about that we see a shift. But don't think for a second that the ruling class cannot create some kind of event, some kind of geopolitical event. Think about a huge terrorist attack or whatever. And we're talking about false flag attacks here, conspiracies, and public opinion immediately shifts like that. It is so sensitive. It is so, how can you say that? What's the English word? Like that it's very brittle. Can I say that? It's very brittle. That it's very brittle. It can change like that. And just like during the Iraq war, there was huge support for the Iraq war. What does that mean? You can like this, you can change public opinion and hype up racist sentiments, which support geopolitical endeavors in favor of imperialism. So before we have a new conversation, I just wanted to bring that in. It's so important to understand how geopolitics and racism are integrally connected. Sorry to end on this negative note.
Well said, Kareem. I gotta, I guess, come to peace with the fact that these shows are almost impossible to do for just an hour. But anyway, I want to get Josana in here as well. My amazing co-host of the International Leftist Coalition. Any last thoughts, any last words on anything you want, Josana, anything you want to plug or promote?
Yes, I will just let you all know that we are organizing with the International Healthcare Coalition. Woohoo! Yes, Sharif created it, and me, Quaker, Joy, they're here watching the stream, and so many other amazing people who are supporting and part of the group. We are organizing, also Afini, that used to be in the channel with us, the rally, the International Women's Rally for Medicare for All. And we will launch our fundraising, and we will need all the support we can get. If you cannot donate, which is understandable, please put the word out there outside of social media contacts, email people. We are going to need all the help we can get to put the rally together. It's going to be on March 8th in Washington, D.C.
What's the link for that?
We will launch tomorrow, and I'll tag you. I send it to you. Thank you.
That's dope. Man, Josana out here really fighting, really fighting. We love to see it. We appreciate everyone for tuning in. As far as I know, we're doing this every Thursday night, whether we are available or not. But it's a great show. Tomorrow, we got the Savvy Show on RBN as well. This Saturday, I'm gonna have Caleb Moppin. We got a few great foreign policy guests for you guys this month. Caleb is great. He wrote an op-ed exposing BreadTube and their agents as agents of imperialism, because we all know that they always promote CIA talking points and this weakness on imperialism on the left. I really want to talk to him about. Also, the third weekend of this month, we have Luna Oy on. I'm super excited about that. Been following her work for a while. I want to talk to her because she speaks as
I'll be
someone
there.
who, yeah, Josana. I got to introduce. We gotta have Josana there as well. We didn't have a Brazilian anarchist, a Vietnamese communist, a black Marxist. It's a great conversation. So that's coming this week as well. So thank you guys for supporting us, watching the channel. Please share with a friend. This Social Cinematic. We sign out. Take care, guys.